in endurance sport, doing more will make you fitter, which will make you faster. But there reaches a point where you can only take on so much load. So stopping people before they get there is like the fine tightrope you're always walking. And again, that consistency of always doing things is more important than for a very short space of time doing something incredible. If you stop at a traffic light, apart from the fact you're in your trainers, does the person stood next to you know you're on a run, right? And if the answer is no, you're probably running slow. Those slow runs, you should almost forget you did them. You know, when you get back from 10K slow, an hour later, you'd be like, did I go for a run? Like, it should be that easy on your body.
Welcome back to 5 Miles Easy. Today, we are joined by running and triathlon coach, Tim George. Now, whether you are just coming off a marathon or thinking about your next big race, this episode will be so good for you because we're talking all things how to structure a training block, what sessions to do to improve, and how to take a good off-season so you recover properly.
Do you know what? I love hearing from different coaches because everyone has such a different approach, and I just find it so interesting, and I always learn something from every coach and just try and incorporate little bits into my own training. But on the topic of getting back into training, I feel like you must be...
I have an update.
Yes.
I have a very exciting... So I had my scan at 8 weeks and got the results, and honestly, I felt like I got a gold star. And it's the best gold star.
Okay, can we stop before you tell me, because I don't actually know the result yet. We were saving it to announce on the podcast, so I don't know what the scan looked like. You haven't told me yet.
Well, the consultant just said he's very pleased with how it's healed, and basically I can start back running.
Yay!
Which is the best news ever.
Could you see the image at all?
Yeah, I did. I mean, to be honest, I don't know what I'm looking for. And I was kind of looking, the worst thing about this process was they sent me the images, but they didn't send the report to me. So I was literally going through these images. First of all, I couldn't open them for ages. And then I eventually got the file, which I could open. And I went through them like trying to find, I don't know what I'm looking for in these scans. So that was a bit of a torturous period of finding out, but it's good news. And I literally felt like I got a gold star on healing a fracture.
Congratulations. That's great. So yeah, how long now before you can run? Because I know last week you thought it could be really soon, but...
Yeah, well, technically, I mean, I can start back, but Aidan is very much putting the reins on. My instant reaction was, well, do you think I could do like a 30-minute run next week? And he was like, absolutely not. You're on the Ultra G. And there was a bit of back and forth and negotiation as to, you know, how long this Ultra G run would be. But in summary, I think next week's going to be on the Ultra G. Then the week after, I may be released outside.
That's exciting.
Very exciting.
And I guess as annoying as it is having to negotiate when you can run again, you'd always rather have another couple weeks of not running to ensure that you can run long term.
I mean, my sensible brain says that, yes, but it's so hard when you see people out running.
But you've done 9 weeks. I still can't believe you said it's 9 weeks.
I've done 9 weeks, yeah.
That's crazy.
So I will still be mostly on my bike for the next kind of 3 to 4 weeks, but just gradually building up, and I can still get out on my bike, which has been really nice.
Yeah.
Actually, and building back a bit of fitness. So the comeback is
very
pending,
soon.
but very soon, yeah.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
But how has your week of training been?
Yeah, it's been all right. No real updates. But actually, I would say my one update is I decided to stop posting on Strava. I just felt, sometimes I'm like, I don't do it for anyone else apart from myself, because I actually really don't use Strava as something to scroll through. Like, I don't really look at other people's stuff. I literally upload my thing and then leave the app, and it's my own training diary. And then I realized, sometimes when you're like doing a run or a session, I was like thinking what I was going to call it. And I was like, why am I doing this? Because it's literally for me. I don't care for other people. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to keep it all on private for now, because sometimes it can actually just stress me out. Like if a session's not going well, and I'm like, but no one needs to see this. And actually that makes it way easier. Like no one needs to know what I'm doing. So
no one needs to know.
I've just, I might come back soon, but I'm just on a little break.
Or just become a full-time Strava mule and just put it on other people's Strava. And then,
I actually thought that, because I thought if I'm not posting on mine, someone else can take my runs.
Well, there we go.
They can have
the
them.
actual reason
Who
you
wants
stopped
my
posting
runs?
on Strava, isn't it?
It was just an excuse, yeah.
Steph has a new job.
So that was just my little update. But no, training's fine. but just no real interesting things.
Okay, you say that, but speaking of kind of structuring training, you're now 8 weeks out from Valencia. So have you started your marathon block?
7.5. Yeah, kind of. It's kind of hard to say when you start a block because it just sort of flows into it. You know, like I've done now 3 20-mile runs. So I feel like I only really do 20-mile runs if I'm marathon training. So I feel like, yes, it started, but I've still not done any like big marathon sessions. I've actually got a race next week, a 10-mile race.
Ooh.
So it's going to be really good to see just where I'm. Literally have no idea where I'm at the moment. So I just want to like run hard, not really look at the watch, just go on feel, see where I'm at. And then I think from there, it'll be like, okay, what do we need to work on in terms of getting to the marathon? Yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah, be fun.
Well, in terms of building up for races, I know Tim has loads of tips for us. So shall we get him on the 5 miles easy sofa?
Let's do it.
Tim, thanks so much for joining us on 5 miles easy today. Our first question, which we ask all our guests, is what is your why for running?
So thinking about this before I came in, knowing it would be question 1, and the more you think about it, the more you actually question why I run. So I hadn't really thought about it. I just go running. And then thinking about it for a question, I run now because it's a fun way to exercise. And I think partly to keep fit, but I enjoy doing it. So, you know, you could do anything to keep fit. There's 1,000 different activities. But if you find one you enjoy, you're more likely to do it. So I guess my why is because I enjoy it, to keep fit.
Yeah, and I think that's so right in terms of people finding the thing they enjoy, because actually, even for people that don't enjoy running, sorry, I realise this is a running podcast, but I do say to them, you know, you don't have to do that, like force yourself to do it. You find something else that you actually enjoy doing because that's the thing you're going to stick at. But I mean, it's great when running is the thing you enjoy because, yeah, it gets you out the door.
Yeah. And I think especially, you know, if we're talking about like motivation later is bound to come up. If you enjoy it, you're more likely just to go and do it because you want to. If you don't enjoy it, you're never going to force. If you have the choice, you'll find a reason not to do it. With lots of this stuff, again, when we'll move on to, but you know, consistency is like probably the most important thing. So if you don't enjoy it that much, go and find something you do enjoy. Like,
or change your training. And I will again get onto this a bit more later. But I was actually talking to you guys today who were saying they one of them was like, I love running on the trails, and it was, I can't remember where he was on holiday and was absolutely loving it. Then got back to London and tried to just go out and like hammer 3 miles around the park every day, and he was like, I hated it. I was like, well, don't do it. You know, go and find some trails or structure your training, do sessions, and there's so many different types of running and different types of training. So I think your point is absolutely right. It's just finding that thing that you enjoy, whether that's speed work or just long slow runs or trails or doing a different sport. But let's not promote that on a running podcast. But that kind of gets on to the next question of why did you become a coach?
So I was an accountant for a while, and then I was a personal trainer for a while. And then coaching is, to me, like a progression from personal training. It's sort of a niche of personal training. So most of the people have a very specific goal, typically a race that they've entered. And I find that gives them a much greater focus on why they're training. They're typically more motivated, which is enjoyable. And because they have that particular race they're aiming for, they're looking for much more objective progress. Like they know if they've achieved what they set out to do. So I think that accountability is really enjoyable. Like I find that enjoyable anyway, having them, you know, it's their free time, typically. Not many people are able to do it for a job. So typically your free time is your most precious thing, and they're entrusting you with it. And like, yeah, I think that's why I enjoy coaching.
I'm just interested because I work in finance as well as an accountant. So I'm interested why you left the profession. Was it?
I wasn't very good at exams.
Okay, absolutely fair enough. Was it your interest in fitness that made you want to be a PT, or was it actually helping other people? Or both?
It was initially fitness. Like an interest in fitness got me into it, and that was the reason. And then the more I did it, like now I do like 10% of the fitness I used to, you know, because like life changes. And again, that's part of what's interesting about training a variety of people is how much of their time is for their fitness, and like fitting it into your life. Everyone's life is completely different. So, and then, yeah, I don't like set out in like some noble quest to help people, but it is, I mean, that is part of the reward of coaching people is when you see them achieve what they want. Like that is cool. Like that's why you're doing it, and I think, especially with endurance sports, so much of the payoff comes in the future. So I think you were saying the other day, you're just getting back into running and like you were struggling with sessions and then enjoying them again. But when you're starting and you're unfit, the sessions aren't particularly enjoyable. And like, you're nowhere as good as you were. And that first bit's really hard. And you're looking miles into the future. And the trade-off is massive when you get there. But you don't get a trade-off all the time. So yeah, I think it's that long-term investment is part of the excitement of it.
And what do you see as your main role in being a coach in terms of getting the person to that goal?
It's understanding why they're doing it. Someone once said there's no secret sessions. So, if a coach tells you, I've got this magic formula that's definitely the best. I mean, there are some sessions that are better than others, but if you do 5 1K reps or 4 1K reps, it really isn't a material difference. Like understanding why they're doing it and what they want from it, and then helping them get that that's what I think is the secret. And like, it's just getting to know them. And in endurance sport, doing more will make you fitter, which will make you faster. But there reaches a point where you can only take on so much load. So stopping people before they get there is like the fine tightrope you're always walking. And people always think they can do more. So it's like trying to rein them back in. And they have to believe that just doing what they're told will be enough. Like not always trying to cram that extra little bit.
That's what my coach says. He's like, my main job is being realistic with your capability because I always overestimate my capability. And he's always the one that's like, no, you're not fit enough to do that, or you're not there. You can't do that session yet. But it's it's dreaming, isn't it? It's always thinking, well, maybe I can just do that little extra bit.
Again, we're coming on to goals, but so much of for me is the goals is often talking people back, like reining in their ambition, but not in a negative way. It's like what you want to achieve can still be brilliant, but you've got to understand where you are now. And like, there's no point in having a totally unrealistic goal. Like you want to succeed. That's the whole point of doing this. Like, even if your goal is, I want to do 3 5K runs a week. Well, awesome. Like if you get to that, because you can't do it now, that is success. Don't always be judging, like setting something too ambitious, because if you never achieve it, then you've never succeeded, which isn't true, because just by doing any training, you're succeeding. How realistic you're being on a particular session, but also like big picture, I think is so hard.
I like that. It's like baby steps and just, ticking those small boxes rather than you've just got a PB. So let's like take a whole massive chunk off the next time. Actually, no, you could just take a smaller chunk and it's still another PB.
Or, I think especially with running, we could become so obsessed with time. Every marathon should have its own, you shouldn't compare marathons. Like even the same course on a different day will be different conditions. But people become so obsessed with the time. Berlin is a quick course. Valencia is a really good one. But Manchester, not a slow one, but it's quite rolling. There's a lot between miles 18 and 24 where you're out in the middle of nowhere. There's less crowds. There's less people generally around you. Like all those are little factors that people will overlook. So like you say, like a PB, like executing your race better should be the goal. So it's like trying to make people understand what for them is good execution. I think as much as like the number looks great, but you could have a terrible race and go quick, but you got a bit lucky. Whereas you could also execute brilliantly, but it might have been into a headwind. And anyone looking online is like, well, that looks slow, but it was brilliant.
How do you help people set good goals? It's a realistic, what should they look like, and how do you kind of look at their training and say, okay, this is what we should be aiming for? How far in advance?
For me, first of all, it has to be a goal that they want to achieve. There's no point in me telling you this would be a good goal. Like you have to want to do it. And then I think for me, you have to break it down into what have you done before? And like with that history, what is sensible? It comes back to realistic, I think, is my number one thing. And a lot of people, I think, initially will come to me and feel like I'm being unambitious. And it's not that. It's just that I think that you have to be able to see that you can get there. So I think January, for example, New Year's resolutions, people often pick way too many things. And if you break one of them, then you just throw them all out because you're like, well, I'm done now. Whereas if you'd picked much smaller things, they'd have made a huge difference and you'd always do them. And again, that consistency of always doing things is more important than like for a very short space of time doing something incredible. Yeah, I'd say they have to want to do it because that will get them out the door doing it. And it has to be realistic so that they see that they're getting closer, because those little wins keep fueling you to go out and do it. If you set something too ambitious, once you start realizing you're going to miss it, it's too easy to give up. And you're like, oh, well, I'm never going to do it. So then you don't even get close.
Yeah, you hear about that so much with people just starting out running as well. And, it'll keep going for the first few weeks and then it will just feel really hard.
Yeah.
And it's getting past that barrier and just creating those little steps that are achievable. But yeah, it's so hard to get to that point, I think, where it feels good. Running feels good and you're achieving those little things.
And again, patience is like, again, one of my favorite words. You have to have that patience at the start. So typically someone will come and it will be like, right, for 3 weeks, just run slow and easy for, I don't know, pick a number, 5K every other day. Well, I can do that. Okay, I know, but just go and do it. And then they've ticked that off and it's like, right, that's the first bit done. And then you can see from that where they are and like you learn a lot about them just from doing that. And then, you can add on from there. So many people, I think, will have entered a race and be like, right, now I've got to start training, do too much too early. And then you're forever chasing your tail because you'll probably start getting niggles. You'll start getting tired. You didn't give yourself a chance at the start. You've got to pace it like the same way you pace a race. You've got to pace your training. Yeah, working back from where you see you can get to your starting point and not be like, I want to do 8 sessions a day. And yeah.
This will be Rose very soon, I feel. Like, when she starts back running, it'll be like, I want to do more. But being really patient those first few weeks of just like small little runs.
Yeah, well, it's not my forte.
I think part of the more people you coach, I think there's benefit if a new person comes to me is you're trying to not let them make the common mistakes. I know when I started, I didn't have a coach. And you make every single mistake in the book because you just do it through like trial and error and you find out the hard way. I think the benefit of having a coach is that the coach will tell you, you don't need to find this out the hard way. Just trust me, which does take a leap of faith. Sometimes people, as much as they want to trust you, just have to find out for themselves. Something like running a 5K. If you're used to running a marathon, a 5K sounds like nothing, right? But you still have to pace it. If you start too hard, just like a marathon, it's going to go horribly wrong. But you will, like something like that, you can find out yourself. But then, there's so many stories of like print off a training plan, just start ticking off sessions, and
that was me when I first started. Actually, funnily enough, I just thought about when just before I went, a bit before I went pro, it started lockdown, made redundant, had this 3 months off, and I signed up for a half Ironman. This is like exactly what you would just cry about. Signed up for this half Ironman really enthusiastically, and I Googled professional triathlete training plan. And I decided to do it. And it was 4 sessions a day. And I was like, but I have no excuse because I'm not working. And I literally lasted a week. And I just remember I was like, I am so tired.
Yeah, because they would have come from like a base of building up to the start of that plan.
Yeah. I remember I did like 3K in the pool and I'd only ever swum like 1K. And that was one swim out of 2 in a day. And I could not lift my arms above my head the next day.
I think you hear a story. Oh, I've met people who've come to me who have read things like add 2% to your run, right?
Yeah.
And they'd got to a point where they were running 18K 3 times a week. So as in they ran 3 times a week and they'd started off at 3 6Ks and they'd added like 2% to every run 3 times a week. And I was like, sorry, you're doing 18K 3 times a week? No, that's not what it means. But if you don't, if you're not in a community, you don't necessarily get any feedback on it. And you're just like, seems to make sense. Don't see why it wouldn't. And yeah, again, like for me, it's sort of showing people like, no, that's not what you need to do. Like, this is a system. I know it works.
You learn a huge amount from a coach. And so when someone selects their goal, how far in advance should they be training for that? Or I assume it depends on what that goal is.
It depends on, sometimes it depends on how much time they have.
Yeah.
Because often people will come and be like, I've got this in 8 weeks. And you're like, right, well, we have 8 weeks. I think like now London's coming up, or people are starting to think about London. And for me, London, if you start before the new year, you've probably started a bit too early. I think, again, you've got to pace your enthusiasm as much as anything else, because the really important time where like you're missing friends' parties, or I don't know, not drinking for a week, things like that, they're best saved for when it matters, which is way nearer the race. I try and get people to be like, okay, you're going to do a 12-week block for your marathon. And for those 12 weeks, you are going to have to take it more seriously if you want to get what you want from it. But that doesn't mean starting now, like wherever we are 20 weeks away from it. I think one of the common mistakes I see is people trying to be too fit for too long. What is your maximum week? Like, what do you think is the peak week that you can do? And you want to have that like 1 or 2 weeks before your race, and everything before that should be building up to that fairly consistently.
Would you structure it, or how would that training block, take a 12-week training block, how would it be broken up?
One of the things I always say is like you want to be as good as you can for the time you have available. And if people say, how many sessions should I be doing? I will never answer that question. My question is, what blocks have you got? And that might change as like you get to know them and you're like, you could probably fit in one more here. But initially it's like, well, what slots do you have in your weekly routine? So starting from there, keep it simple and short, and just get them in the routines of always training in those slots. Most of my runners, if we just look at runners, their balance of sessions over a week is probably very similar. But the thing that changes is just volume. So for me, again, common mistake I see is people like going to track, for example. But track for me is like the sprinkling on the very top of the cake. So it might be, I don't know, 10% of your running volume for a week. But if you're running 40K, 10% is 4K, which is like 10 400s, which doesn't sound like much. Like if you're strict on that ratio, then it shows you like the people who go and get the most benefit from track are the people who are doing like 90K weeks, which isn't saying go and do a 90K week to let yourself go to track. But it's more like, well, if I'm not doing a 90K week at track, I should probably be doing like half the reps. So if you did every other rep and had double the rest, you'd probably get way more benefit from the track session. Yeah, and it's things like that, I think.
Interesting. So the more advanced runners would be doing longer sessions rather than faster. So it's the actual volume that you would increase rather than the intensity.
No, I'd still want them the intensity. I'm saying that.
But they wouldn't be more intense than the beginner runners. It would just be relative.
No, it'd be, yeah.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
For me, especially beginners, you're fast. If you're going to track to do 400 reps, right, that should be really fast. And if you're a beginner, the chances are you need a lot of recovery. Like, even if you're an advanced runner, to get the benefit of it, you need the recovery. Like, I think when we start doing like 400s off 30 seconds, now you're almost more in tempo. And again, it's just making sure I try and be quite specific on what intensity I want you to run at. Slow for me is like properly slow. People are like, oh, like conversational. And it's like, if you can't talk, you're really, really in the red. Like you can talk quite a long way. You can be talking.
You can talk in a tempo, really.
You can talk in tempo, yeah. So conversational is silly. Like my way is like, if you stop at a traffic lights, apart from the fact you're in your trainers, does the person stood next to you know you're on a run, right? And if the answer is no, you're probably running slow.
Yeah.
If you're panting and like hands on knees, again, that comes back to like how you're structuring your week and stuff. Like slow is, you can only run too fast for slow. You can't run too slow.
And what's your reasoning for that? How would you explain that to your athlete, the importance of running slow for most of the week?
It's asked a lot because, again, when people first come to me and I'm like, your slow has to be super slow. Mm-hmm. And as an example, I reckon if your park run is 20 minutes, so 4-minute Ks, your slow is probably around 6-minute Ks. I would say like that's slow. Like most of my training's to heart rate, but just as an illustrative example, and like most people will say like, that's absurd. Like I'd never go slower than 5. And it's like, I know, but that's sort of my point. And the benefit is those slow runs, you should almost forget you did them. When you get back from 10K slow, an hour later, you'd be like, did I go for a run? Like it should be that easy on your body. That allows you to train more because you don't have to recover for as long. You've done the run, you've done your 10K, it was nice and easy, and you're saving yourself for the few sessions a week where you actually are training hard. And that allows you to build your volume. And if you build your volume, you'll be quicker. I mean, to a point.
So there's not actually any benefit of like pushing those runs to increase your fitness?
No, I don't believe so. I think if you know, one of the things I'm most proud of as a coach is my athletes are very rarely injured, which on a running podcast I appreciate might sound like gold dust.
Yeah.
But again, like part of that is forcing them to run slow and like being careful with like when you are running fast, we're not doing it for very long and there's a specific reason that we're doing it. Do you see what I mean? It's not because track does feel good. You know, like a good hard track session is really good fun. And I mean, coming back to goals, often at the start, it's like, well, what do you want to achieve? Do you do your fitness because you want that endorphin hit from Tuesday night track? Or are you trying to do something incredible in 3 months' time? And they're not necessarily compatible. Like you can do elements of it again, like I was saying, that you don't have to do the whole track session. You can still go and get the social element from doing every other rep. Like you're still there at the beginning for the warm up and the end at the cool down. But it's just trying to make those things work for you. And I think again, it's all trade-offs. You know, if you're a pro runner, then you have to be much more like, I can only do the things that benefit me for running. Like if for example, we decided that running with friends never actually helped you, you'd have to make the business decision that, okay, if it doesn't have a benefit, I can't do it because I can only do the things that benefit me. But most of my athletes, there's a social element to it, obviously. And it's trying to present to them which bits, like how it will affect their training. So which bits are good and which bits are hindering it. And a hindering bit might be really enjoyable. So you might take that trade-off. But if you're 5 minutes slower in your marathon, you've just got to make peace with that. And again, that coming back to what do you see as your role as a coach, like that's part of it, is like trying to make sure that they know that they're going to get the result they want and like present the choices to them so that they know that they've made them.
So you mentioned track sessions and easy running. What else? How would you structure a week? You know, so you do one track session, a few easy runs, then what else would you do?
So yeah, they probably have, most of them are doing 4 runs, I would say, of which 2 are slow. 1 has a sprinkling of track that I call technique because it's teaching your body how to run faster. And very rarely are they actually doing it on a track. But it is like, you're not really looking at metrics. You're just running fast. And then I think the tempo ones are where you learn the most. So again, most of it's to heart rate. So you don't have a target pace, which I know, again, runners love to know what pace they're running at. And when you're running to heart rate, like if you're running on your own at tempo, you might be 10 seconds slower than you would be in a group, but you know you're at the right intensity. And spending time at that, you get comfortable with that pace. So understanding
how should it feel if people are
tempo,
like listening to this and like, okay, I don't have a heart rate monitor, but I can go by feel.
At tempo, I would say you should always be able to speed up. I set people 4 paces. There's like slow, cruise, tempo, and fast. Like fast is you're like being chased. Slow is you can stop at a traffic lights and you're not sweating. Cruise is most people's like normal jog. Like if they'd never measured how they're running before, the pace that they would run around the common is probably cruise. And then tempo's faster than that, but you could always speed up. You know, we're all with chasers.
Yeah.
And within the chasers, they have their Thursday night tempo session, which is, I reckon, one of the best sessions there is. And like that, I think the trick with that is going in the right pace group, because it's easy to get dragged along at that too fast because it's such good fun. But it's being strict on yourself to be like, well, this wasn't quite the point of this session. Like, you know, if you're a bit slow, it should be like you don't finish it toast. You finish it that you could still accelerate if you need to. And I think it's just practice.
That's such an interesting point, because I think with workouts, I know I'm guilty of this. I always want to finish the workout feeling like I've worked so hard and that I'm really like pretty dead at the end. And again, my coach reminds me that that's not the purpose of every single session. And he kind of gives me, he does it the other way. It's like, right, these are the sessions where you're allowed to cook yourself. Like, go and cook yourself. The rest are not for that. But it's, I think unless you've got someone telling you that, the temptation is always to think, okay, I'm going to push it as hard as I can, because as you say, it's quite fun in a weird way.
I do like high rocks training now, where there is quite a lot of intensity, and that is good fun. Like, there's no two ways about it. But it depends. Do you want to go because it's fun and you get a bit fitter, or do you want to actually get better at running? And they're not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah.
Which
and
is
get
tricky.
to the race day kind of fresh and at your peak fitness on the day, rather than overtired and overfit almost.
Yeah. And again, you can get too fit too early, I think. You know, if your block starts too early, too long that you're trying to hold on to being as fit as you can be. So again, like one of my almost golden rules with people I coach is you have to have an off season. I won't talk to you for like 2 months. Go away. It depends how big your goal is. Like, but if you've had a big enough goal, you've invested so much in it that your body just needs to have that recovery. And like, you're not doing nothing. And I'm not quite as rude as not talking to you, but you know, you have a break, have a mental break from it. Like, you want to rekindle that love for it, and you'll always be able to get fit again. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't seem like that in the time. I think especially when people first get into it, they can typically go like 18 months of just continually getting fitter. And because that's always worked for them, they think that's always going to be the way. And it's normally only, unfortunately, when someone has an enforced break and they go back to zero and then come back again, that they realize, oh, wait, hang on. It's not quite a continual ramp over like 10 years. You can have peaks and troughs. It's trying to illustrate these things to people in a way that they buy into.
Yeah.
Because if they buy into it, they'll do it. But if they aren't quite sure, they're less willing to do it. Like,
yeah. So how do you time your off season? I guess, does it depend on what race you've done? If it's a really big race, like your A race?
I mean, their off season is straight after their big race.
Mm-hmm.
How long would it be for a marathon?
Good question. I would say after a marathon, you probably need at least 4 weeks just chilling out.
And what would that look like in terms? Would
so
there be any running?
Depends on who they are. I mean, yeah, I think you can run. As long as you're not injured. If you've just trained for a marathon, the chances are the other people in your life are aware of the fact that you've just trained for a marathon. So like those 4 weeks are the perfect time where you can give more back to the people who've helped you up to your marathon. And like, it's just training because you feel like it, as opposed to training because you have to. Like, you know, there are no set sessions. You can do whatever you feel like, try something new. It's important to keep moving, because otherwise the restart does take longer. Yeah, but you want to pace your enthusiasm for all these things, and having time off is really beneficial, I believe.
And do you ever recommend in that off season that people like work on weaknesses, like get in the gym, or, you know, work if they've had niggles during the build up, work on that during the off season? Or do you think it should be like a total break, forget about running?
I think you will get found out during the training if you are not prepared enough. So invariably, something will go wrong in the training that will affect your race enough that you'll want to sort out the problem yourself. I think if you've got through it and achieved what you wanted, then your weaknesses are going to be quite small. So again, I would say your time's better spent like recharging your batteries completely. You know, you can use the time in your next build to address things like that. Is a major technical flaw will have got found out previously and you'd already be working on it.
I think it's such a hard one, whether the race goes really well or not well, because either way, you're either had a really good race and are itching to get back to it because it was so good, or it's not gone well and you're like, right, I have to get back to training. And actually, again, that's where, you know, coaches and other people around you really come in and have to enforce the break, because as you say, it is so important. And I think one thing that is often neglected of it is, okay, that you've done the race, but you've actually, like, the race is not just the race, it's like the whole training block. And regardless of how the race goes, you've done all that training, and that's what you're really taking the break from. And,
you know, because sometimes there've been races cancelled recently, like, you know, for bad weather and stuff. And that's always a really interesting one where you didn't do the race, but you know you were in the shape to do the performance that you wanted, but you didn't actually do it. But that doesn't mean that all the work you put into it doesn't count. See what I mean? So just because you didn't get the medal, or just because you didn't get a piece of paper with a time on, doesn't mean it was a failure, because the success was all the training preceding it. And like, that's really hard. Like, that's an extreme example. Like, that's worse than a race going badly. You know, like, that's a race that could have gone really well, but just never happened.
Yeah,
Like,
that reminds me of COVID, like 2020. I think I was marathon training the whole year because there was just like never a race. And then I ended up doing a marathon in December, but I'd been marathon training basically from January because I thought I was doing London Marathon. So it was just like, I think having to, at the time, my coach would kind of, like every few weeks, I'd have to have like 1 or 2 down weeks so that I could like keep it going.
Yeah.
And I could, but it's right. You just have to remember to almost recover from the training, not just the race.
As a coach, how do you deal with those kind of curveballs or setbacks in training and where people have to have a few weeks off because of injury or just life, whatever that gets in the way?
So I like, my rule when I set people up is, if you have to miss a session for work, say, never play catch up, right? So just move on, right? Because that's fine. These things happen, you know? So if it's something like work, they make peace with it a bit easier because, you know, I had to stay behind. I literally couldn't go. And then it makes the best easier for them to accept. If they've got a slight niggle, they're more likely not to do the session. And it's like getting in that mindset of like, every session isn't that important. Now, saying that, what I also then do is, like, if you're always missing Wednesday's run, for example, then Wednesday's run just shouldn't be in your plan. So then I'll adjust the plan to make it so that they are completing all of it. Because often, especially when people start, they're greedy about what they can fit in. And you soon find out like that doesn't work for them. And I'd far rather you had 4 sessions a week that you did every single week than 6 sessions a week that you sometimes did some of them. But, you know, like, if it's a really bad injury and you just have to stop, it's trying to get them to see that no one has ever regretted taking long enough to recover. People have typically regretted trying to rush back, because when you try and rush back, again, you get stuck, never fully recovering, trying to get on, and like, it's really hard. Yeah, it's trying to the little niggles early and explain to them, okay, well, on the race day, this is how it might affect it. But to get you to race day, that's the most important thing. Yeah. For me, healthier is faster than fitter. I'd rather you were 100% healthy and having missed a few sessions than had a slight niggle but had hit every session.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what signs would you look out for in your athletes to almost tell them, you know, you do need a break, or you need extra rest, where it may not have been initially in the plan, but there are signs that you see that it's needed?
Yeah, I mean, things like they'll miss a session, which is a sure sign that they are really tired. You know, and everyone's so different. So you have to get to know them a bit, because everyone reacts differently to these things. Like informal feedback. So just catching up with them and chatting to them, you get a sense of if there's too much on their plate. And, you know, I always would encourage anyone to be open with their coach about what's going on in life, because I think one of the most underestimated things is the stress of life on your training. So people just consider like the hours that they've trained, but you could be doing the same training, but your boss has had you in working 4 hours overtime for the 2 weeks, and that will have a huge impact on your training. Now, it's hard because you don't want it to, because your training is like your free time and your special thing, and you enjoy that so much. You don't want to admit that work's influencing that. But, you know, so by talking to them, you get a sense for if they've got too much on their plate. But that, I mean, that's one of the hardest parts, because we all enjoy training. When training's going well, the buzz you get from that, you don't want to let it go. So like, it's hard to admit that you might be putting yourself in the red because you're enjoying it so much and you don't want that taken away.
Yeah,
Are there any kind of physical signs that I think athletes themselves can look out for? Because it is sometimes hard to know whether, you know, I always, if I'm feeling a bit tired going into a session, sometimes I think, well, that's kind of the purpose. Like, it's marathon training. I'm meant to feel tired. And it is hard to know
some
what's
of
too
that
much.
is just experience. But it's like, so it's very hard for the athlete, when we were saying before, like trial and error, which is again why speaking to your coach is important, because there's certain aches and pains. If you discuss it with your coach, they'll know if that's like, they'll know what training they set you. So they'll know if you should be feeling like, yeah, that was really hard for 10 days. Or if you're like, oh, that was quite a straightforward week. If they're finding that hard, there's probably something amiss here. So again, I think just that open dialogue with your coach, like, it's your coach who has the experience that you're trying to tap into.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what's the biggest mistake that you see athletes making? I guess, then how do you help them overcome those things?
I'd say, so lots of my clients are triathletes or multi-sport athletes, and I would say the number one mistake is picking too many races that are their A race, not being specific on which race really matters to you, and choosing that one and knowing that the others, you'll still be fit and you'll still do well, but you might not like set the world record, but that's also fine. I know. So some of them will do like a spring marathon and then an Ironman in June, for example, being like, oh, well, the marathon will be good help for the Ironman in June. And it's like, well, okay, but to do really well in the marathon, you don't need to be swimming and cycling. But to do well in the Ironman after that, you do need to be swimming and cycling. So which one matters to you more? And people try and, I think, do too much. I'd say that's probably the biggest mistake I see. I think it would be great if people could race in disguise, I'm guessing. But like, Rose, I'd have thought you'd love to be able to do a park run when no one knew it was you. You know what I mean? Like just for the sheer joy of doing a park run and not have people go, oh, Rose did park run. I wonder what time she did.
Yeah.
Right. So you could do it in like 5 weeks' time after, you've had a layoff and just do it for the sheer joy and no one worrying about it.
Don't hand in your barcode. That's how you do it.
Or don't hand in your barcode. But you know what I mean? Like, and I think that's true for everyone though.
It's quite funny because no one actually
it's
really
almost
cares.
more fun to do the races. Yeah. But you don't realise that at the time.
Yeah.
Like when you're in the game, like, or, when you're doing it, you think everyone is looking, but no one's looking.
So it's a nice thought to have if you could do it in disguise. I do get that.
Yeah.
And what about coming into winter? A lot of people struggle with motivation, even if they've got a race that they really want to target. The nights are getting longer. The weather's going to be pretty bad soon. What advice do you give to people who are struggling with?
Apart from do a marathon in like September where you get to train over the summer, failing that. I think you've just got to remind yourself why you're doing it. The reason you're doing it should be big enough to provide the motivation. I think often you've just got to write down when you start, like, what is success in this for me? So I have all sorts of athletes, and for some of them, it might just be like, I can't run 10K. I would love to be able to run 10K. And then through training, they realize, oh, I've now got to a point where I can easily run 10K. But then it's like looking back on that original goal. So I think writing down why you're doing it at the very, very start and just keeping that like almost on the fridge as a reminder is a great way of motivating yourself to get out and do it. And like, if it turns out that wasn't a good enough reason, well, maybe you need to pick a different thing that you're training for. Do you see what I mean? I think, again, like, because other people are doing it is not a good reason to do something. So, your motivation has to just be for you,
Find the thing that gets you out the door.
Yeah.
I love that. Write it on your fridge. Very good tip.
What is one piece of advice that you would give to all runners, regardless of what level they're at?
Run slow.
I actually do love that one because I just feel like it can't be hammered home enough. Like, no matter how many times people say run easy, I see it all over Strava. People are not running easy, and people write easy run and it's
slow. And also,
yeah.
To be fair, I
that's
don't
just
think
such like an ego boost, isn't it? Being like slow run and it's there.
Yeah.
I think like just
PB.
understanding your pacing is key. Across all levels. I think if you, as a sweeping generalization, if you took less good runners, their like spectrum of paces, their difference between slow and fast would be 30 seconds a kilometre, right? If you took an elite marathon runner, I reckon the difference between slow and fast would be like 2 minutes 30, probably more, actually, thinking about it. If they're doing a fast 400, that could well be 2 minutes 30 a kilometre. Their slows could easily be at whatever, 5. You know what I mean? Like understanding that slow is properly slow. And like for me, slow's almost my favorite pace, like personally, because when you're getting back to fitness, it is really slow. As you see yourself getting fitter, your slow gets quicker, right? And like that is a clear sign that you're getting better. You see what I mean? And like that fuels you wanting to go out and train more because you can see your slow getting faster. I think it's easy to fall into a trap of when you get to your current best, thinking, right, from now on, my training paces are whatever that was, and not accepting, like, if you're unfit, you will be slower.
And also accepting on different days, your slow is a different slow. Like some days I just feel absolutely terrible and I think I'm barely moving. Whereas other days you're feeling quite energetic and it feels easy to go a bit faster.
And again, without heading down a massive rabbit hole, that's why all my training that I set people is to heart rate, because your heart rate is always your heart rate. So things will affect that. But if your heart rate is just high because you're ill, or for example, you're just going to be slower. If it's hot, you're just going to be slower. But that's fine because you know you're running at the right intensity, as opposed to being like, my slow must be 5:15 per kilometers, which no one's ever run a 5:16 kilometer if the target's 5:15. But they'll always be a bit quicker and not a bit slower.
I think that's a very refreshing golden rule for running, actually. Run slow. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who will
run
be
slow, though.
very happy to hear that. But Tim, thank you so much. That's been so helpful just to learn. I know a lot of people will find that very helpful in terms of structuring training and, of course, the all-important off-season, which shouldn't be forgotten. But question in terms of it can be in terms of your own sporting endeavors or your coaching. If you could give yourself a big high five for one moment, what would it be?
Oh, that's a curveball. I think the proudest thing I've done as a coach is had someone who's won Triathlete of the Year or Most Improved Triathlete of the Year at the Clapham Chasers for, I think, 8 years in a row now.
Oh.
Which is quite cool. And I've had 3 who've done Most Improved and then Triathlete of the Year in consecutive years.
Do you want to say the name? Give them a bit of a shout out?
No.
Okay.
They know who they are. I'd say that's quite cool.
I love
quite
that.
a big club.
Yeah, great.
Big high five.
That's
such testament.
Well done, mate.
Yeah, it is a testament to your coaching. And I would just like to add that every answer you've said today, I felt like it has been very refreshing. Because loads of coaches have very different approaches as well. So I actually just think how you've answered every question has been probably very reassuring to a lot of listeners of how to approach training. That it's not scary and it is enjoyable. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us, 5 Miles Easy.
See you next time.